It should be offline, but it is coming back on in a second.
Right now it says offline, but there's 4 viewers, so I don't know what the hell's going on.
Oh,
Oh, hey, there we go.
Yay!
Can you guys see us? Or...
Hi, guys.
Yep, we're up.
All right. We got it. Oh, those are great words. And we have 4 viewers. That used to be the number I hoped for when we first started. Tiberius is in the audience. Okay,
So
we'll
now
just...
we just hope for that many panelists.
Can we just get some confirmations that people are seeing us? It's not just 1 or 2?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it seems to be.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they're all
people
saying
are
it's just
cheering.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just go back to the intro and get names and stuff like that. Okay, guys, welcome to Talking in Stations. I think you guys are familiar with the show, so we'll just get started with Ashtarothi.
Hey, I am Ashtarothi of Hydrostatic and High Drag podcasts, as well as Talking in Stations. And I am acting commander of Aderon Robotics.
Awesome. Drayden?
I'm Jordan Trevere. I'm in Multiplex Gaming, part of the Bastion, and also do Open Com show on Thursday nights.
Rivra?
Hey, I'm Reaver. I station trade and I write for TMC.
Dirk?
Hey, it's Dirk McGurk from the Open Com Show and a member of Sniggardly in Pandemic Legion.
Awesome. And before we get to our special guest, Stephen Messner, we're going to introduce Marconius, who may be joining us more often. He's from the Imperium, the CEO of Karma Fleet.
Hey, it's Marconius. Yeah, I don't know if I have to really introduce myself. I think you did it.
Oh,
Your reputation precedes you.
I gotta leave you a little. Okay, and our guest today is author, writer, freelance writer, usually for gaming magazines, is Stephen Messner. We're really happy to have him on the show. He's also an EVE player. Stephen, can you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, hey, I'm Stephen Messner. I'm a freelance writer for lots of different websites, primarily video games like PC Gamer, Rock Paper Shotgun. I've written for a lot of other places, but those are the places I'm most common at. And yeah, a lot of the stuff that I write is actually EVE related. And yeah, I've been playing EVE for about 5 years. I'm currently unaffiliated because you got to have that media unbias. But yeah, when I am playing EVE, when I do have time for it, I usually like to dig around in wormholes.
Oh, awesome. All right. Well, we're off to a late start. A few technical problems. Sorry about that. We don't know if it was us or the site, but something went wrong, and we're glad you're with us. So let's get started with the show. Stephen, you wrote an article recently that talked about casinos and the war, and was a pretty good read. A lot of people read it on both sides and had different reactions, and they were kind of cut along the lines of what side of the war you were on.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that article?
Yeah, so like you said, I wrote an article. So Rock Paper Shotgun is a UK gaming blog that's PC focused, and they wrote this fantastic article by an author called Brendan Caldwell. Called like A War in Space, and it was an article really kind of breaking down how this war started, the motivations behind the bankers who triggered the whole thing, and it was a really fantastic piece. But it was also pretty heavily slanted towards Money Badger side of of things. I don't think Matani even was quoted directly in the article. And so when that article came out, I was talking with my editors at the time. I was in FanFest or at FanFest, and I was there and pitching articles and stuff like that. And my editor asked me if I would write an article, kind of diving into the Imperium side of the conflict and kind of talking about some of their opinions on what's been happening in EVE lately. And so that's exactly what I did. I knew it was going to be a very contentious article from the get-go. Obviously, this is a heated conflict, and people have their opinions on things, and that's great. That's exactly what I wanted, was to kind of open up a discussion there, and address some things. And it's always interesting writing EVE articles and having EVE players read them.
So this was actually a counter article to another article that came out before.
I wouldn't necessarily call it a counter, but it was just us letting the Imperium have their say. And obviously this is a huge, complicated issue. And A War in Space, the Brendan Caldwell article, really sort of had like a story to follow, where mine kind of honed in on, I made the call to kind of hone in on one specific issue, which is, are the banks in EVE Online, or are the casinos in EVE Online unhealthy for the economy because of the amount of money that they can generate and the amount of political power that they can then wield from that? And it was something I wanted to talk And obviously, Alex, the Matani, had some really interesting opinions to share. But then I also wanted to talk to Lenny Kravitz, too, and let him get his say as well.
Well, one thing Matani didn't share that a lot of people brought up as a criticism is the Imperium actually tried to have a casino of their own.
Right.
It didn't get off the ground for whatever reason, and that so it wasn't too evil back then.
And you know what? I think that's a totally fair criticism. I actually did bring it up with him, and we did talk about it. The reason why I didn't end up quoting him in it, and this is something that I think, it's fair for people to have criticisms on it, because it almost comes down to, when you're writing an article, you really have to choose what adds to an article and what subtracts from an article. And the Matani's quotes for it were pretty insubstantial. They were just sort of, he said that they found a better way of making money at the time, and they didn't really focus on it. And obviously, people have their own spin on it, because a lot of the comments I was reading were people saying, well, and Lenny Kravitz actually mentioned it in the article, so it was in the article. But Lenny Kravitz was saying that that's not the case. What actually happened was the Imperium had built such a nasty reputation that no one really wanted to trust them with a gambling website. And so that's why Evening Games Club didn't take off.
That's hilarious. I have one last question, and that you brought up something that was really interesting, and that is they found a different way to make money. And that to me is what is so interesting about this whole thing, that, they were evolving into a better and better plan until they formed the Imperium, which was the best plan possible because they held the most amount of space most securely. So at the time, they had kind of figured out how to secure themselves. And at the same time, there was this other thing developing that wasn't even war-oriented, and that was the plan to make a bunch of money. Mm-hmm. And that plan kind of was like, say, the atomic bomb compared to the radar. So whatever you decided to research and whatever model you decided to use to make the war machine, it's funny. It's like it one idea eclipsed the other that really kind of had nothing to do with war in the first place.
Yeah, it's almost fascinating to me to think that months ago these types of decisions were being made, and nobody could understand the type of ripples of consequence that they would create years down the line, which is whether or not people actually didn't trust the casino, or whether or not they actually just chose to shut it down because they wanted to focus on something else. That's up for debate. That's fine. But just the fact that they were focusing on this, and then they decided to shift their efforts elsewhere, and now this has come back, years later and kind of bit them in the ass, is kind of who could have seen that coming?
Yeah, it's so interesting. What did you guys think of the article?
I think it's kind of funny that, on that point, we actually try a lot of different things all the time. As an organization in space, and actually in TMC as well. But we try things all the time that don't work, or they're not worth the effort, and we just stop doing them. It doesn't necessarily end up being because it's an incomprehensive failure, and how could we ever think about ever doing that? And it's just, we're gonna go on to something else and not spend our time with this anymore.
Right.
So that's, I think, a lot of what the Evening Games Club was. It was just sort of it was going to be more work than what we wanted to initially put into it, and we are actually really lazy people, so it kind of made sense.
Right.
There's also a bigger question, which is that, we have a bunch of people with a lot of money in the game, right? The banking, or the Iwan ISK is not the only way to generate ridiculous amounts of funds.
Right.
So the question really then becomes, what do people do with their trillions of ISK?
Yeah, and that's something I'm intensely curious about, is where does all that money go? Does
Most
it
of
sit
them
in a
swim
wallet?
around, swim around in it, right? It's the Scrooge McDuck pile of gold.
I think
up until this point, it's always been kind of a joke, right? I've got 5 trillion ISK. Oh, I've got 11 trillion ISK. Well, at that point, it becomes ridiculous, right? But now they've shown that you can change the face of the entire game with 11 trillion ISK.
Yeah,
Right.
but it's kind of like the mafia, right? Because they're okay quietly making money, but now they've kind of put their foot in it, and now everybody's looking at it, including this article. And it's, like I said, it's kind of like the Teflon Don who came out and became, this, superhero or whatever. And he brought a lot of attention to something that needed to stay underground in order to survive.
That's exactly right. And so like I've brought this up to Lenny Kravitz. I was like, do you feel like you crossed a line in doing what you did? And he kind of just admitted that, yeah, like this is something that's sort of unheard of, and we've sort of in a sense we've changed the political game of EVE Online, where it's suddenly like, oh damn, like we need to worry about bankers now, because if they have certain affiliations or they're appeased, who knows what they could do. And in that article, Lenny has a great counterpoint to that, which is that these casinos are fundamentally businesses, like they're consumer businesses, and so they need to have they need to do what's best for their customers always. And so if they are going and picking sides in fights and pushing their weight around, they also risk alienating large portions of their customer base and then losing money in the long term because of it. And I think that's a really fair argument on why these casinos maybe aren't super overpowered. But
I don't know. I think gambling works on a different level. It's
yeah.
People don't gamble to win money. Let's put it that way. They gamble to soothe themselves. They're tapping into a reward system. That's why they do it.
Right.
Well, again, it becomes a new consequence for ridiculous amounts of wealth, right? Like, because there's the guy who did the Titan scam, and he scammed like 5 trillion ISK or whatever it was, and it's like, oh well, he now just has infinite wealth. But now it's almost like a dirty bomb out there, right? Like there's an individual who could literally just do whatever he wants.
Well, he can't. They explained that he has to convince certain mercenaries to actually go to war with people they don't like. And at the end of the day, it's kind of like the mercenaries really have the say-so on who gets killed and who doesn't, because they're the ones, that have the guns.
Well, I mean, again, going back to the whole idea of there was always big money in the game. Somebody out there was rich before, right? Now, traditionally it was some of these mega alliances, right? The people who controlled the moon goo. They were the ones with the big money. Not to say that there weren't some individuals out there as well who made trillions off of being good with the market.
Or with their own personal moon.
Well, but there are a lot of people out there that nobody knows anything about, that are just moguls in what it is they do with the markets, right? But
Right.
Those are not probably the people that are going to go out there and do something like this. Then there's also the history with casinos aren't something new, right? I mean, we can go back to Summerblink, but if you go back to Summerblink, the idea back then was a lot of the public out there didn't quite like it. I mean, there was uproars that occurred over favoritism between CCP and Summerblink, the whole Ishikon Watch Scorpion scandal and things like that, right? And you had CSM members who led the pitchfork charge that really ended up bringing down that site, which then went into the whole scramble on other people out there saying, well, what can we recreate? Look how successful he was. What can we recreate? So now we've got a number of casinos out there, and
There's a power vacuum.
And again, going back into kind of the history of it, they were benevolent, right? These casinos were doing things for marketing purposes. They were the guys behind, putting out Titan kill events and things like that. Nobody ever saw them as using their money for as a weapon.
But it wasn't benevolence. It was they were using their money in game, which is nothing, right? It's just money in a game, to generate traffic for their thing, whatever it was, website. Yeah, and the generation of traffic is real money through advertising, I guess. Not that much, but it is.
But what we've now seen potentially is a shift from, hey, I'm going to show off how much money I have by donating to this charity or by sponsoring this thing, and now they have a new avenue, which is that I'm going to force myself into the forefront because I'm going to take over all the headlines because I've made this giant change to the game.
Yeah, and that's exactly what's happened too. Like, it was incredible seeing the level of mainstream media publicity that Lenny and some of the other bankers were getting. Like, Polygon was writing articles about them. Like, all of these websites were talking about these guys specifically. And in a very real sense, I kind of feel like they've become the new gods of EVE Online, because they just,
Well, they seem to be very prepared to claim that throne, because there was some consistency among their articles. I think they did they did a press run, basically.
basically.
Well, go ahead.
Oh, all I was going to say is something that I found really intensely interesting is when I was doing research on this article and I was going back in, a lot of the threads I was looking at on REVE specifically and going back, years even, when it's so fascinating, I feel the publicity shift that I1I has gotten over the years, because you go back and there are these articles when there was some, first wave of banker bans and things like that. And almost the entire tone of this article is incredibly negative, and everyone's talking about how awful I1I is, how they're so sick of them spamming local, all of these things. Like, people just, you get the sense that they just really didn't like I Want ISK. And then you go on the front page now, like in the last week, and there's an article that's like, "Thank you, Lenny," and everyone's just like cheering and
Heroes of the revolution.
Like, it's so weird how these guys have managed to sort of shift their public perception, and now they're like heroes. Exactly.
But how real world is that, though, right? Because you get the people out there that don't like the 1%, right? They don't like bankers, right? Unless they're George Soros, who's giving money to some progressive cause, like Code Pink or something like that, right? And then all of a sudden, that rich guy is the one they like.
Yeah, and they've won so much goodwill from people by being guys who kicked down the Imperium, and now, like, it's just like, that was sort of the crux of the article, is in doing so, like, I get it, people really don't like the Imperium, that's fine, but in your excitement to see them fall, are you getting in bed with like something a little bit more dangerous than a Mittani who kind of just sits in his section of space and sort of is still bound by the rules of the game in a way, because the Mittani has to operate with, he has logistics that he has to account for and all of these things. He's the Roman Empire.
Drayden's next. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, because they were talking about how they try to keep it on a business standpoint, where not taking sides. They obviously took a side in this war,
right?
And they chose the right side because their publicity was really good for it. So they're really smart in doing that. But at the same time, they keep picking sides in wars, they'll no longer have that unbiased, neutral standpoint of the casinos. So by them being possibly this new threat, or I guess you could say, by having this massive amount of wealth that they can use to influence wars, but if influencing the wars could put them on the wrong side at times, do you think that they're going to continue to do that, or is this a one-time thing?
Well, I think that if they're really smart, they'll just carve a piece of territory for themselves, so that way they've got a position on the SOB map, and then generally
they don't want anything to do with the game in that sense. I don't think. Like, even
do you guys
I don't
see
know that
like
you're
how
gonna see them.
ridiculous this is, though? Like, you're talking about basically EVE Online being a mini game about spaceships in space, and the meta game of EVE that moves the spaceships around is a game of
hasn't it always been that way?
Banking websites.
Oh well.
No, there's no way that you can there's no way, even with numerous regions, you can generate the wealth needed to run a large scale war and spend the amount of money that they spent on this war, and the whole Money Badger coalition thing. Like, Goonswarm spent 700 bill in the entire Fountain War of 2013. Granted, there were not really that many capital whelps or any major super capital fights at all, but that was like the entire war. The Fountain War, the Battle of BTAC-R, cost 11 trill. Like, basically, he spent BTAC-R's worth of ISK, and he had that personally to spend. And that's crazy to me. Like, I play the meta game. Like, I sit up there right next to Mittani, and we're looking at each other, and it's like the only thing we can do is start thinking of ways to make money out of game with people's in-game money. And that's ridiculous. And I think, Steven, in your article, you asked CCP Siegel at Vegas, like, what do you think about this direction for the game? And I thought she had a really coward-ass answer for it. Like, she said, we don't want to get involved with the politics and the player base and all this other shit. And I was like, well, you're the creator of the game. Like, you can definitely have the ability to get involved.
If anyone can get involved, it should be you. No, so her answer is the type of CCP Siegel is a fantastic person to interview because she can shut down any answer she wants. And those weren't even the toughest questions I asked. And, she's good on her. CCP should be proud. She is someone that you can put in front of media and they will grill her and she will gracefully answer all of their questions without actually answering them. Which is good for PR. But her answer specifically, I can actually sympathize with their position, though, because how do you make a change in EVE Online without also making some sort of commentary on one side or the other when it becomes a political issue. And that's the problem I think that we're seeing. And that's something that I found very striking about the reception to this article, especially on our EVE, was people were unable to divorce the arguments from the political implications that they had.
But I mean, politics aside, like there's a mechanical thing in the game that you cannot replicate. Like you cannot
No, and I think that's
replicate
fair.
in game like what they are doing to generate ISK, and it's all done out of game. And so from that standpoint alone, like there's no way you can do that and have that valid, in my opinion. Like I mean, it's just there's not.
Well, none of,
scenario.
the only thing you can't actually counterattack that either, except to discredit it.
Right. And so like what's going to happen is like Goonswarm is going to create some kind of thing that nobody will connect to Goonswarm, and it'll be run by like 3 people that know about it, and it'll be like this new up and coming gambling site that has more fun games than I1ISK does, and then it generates a shitload more money than I1ISK eventually. And like that's the meta game.
It's an arms race.
I hate
But
that. Like,
so-
that makes me not want to play EVE, because it's not about spaceships at that point. It's about creating websites and web development and writing code and like creating all these mini games for your fucking casino.
So
But
I
the
strongly
war
disagree
itself
with that.
didn't cost all this, right? I mean, apparently
Ash, you can
it
go
was
next.
the motivational factor, you know. So, and sorry, Ash, I didn't mean
No,
to
no,
jump
go
there,
for
but apparently it was the motivating factor to get people off their ass to actually commit to a war of the scale that they thought they were going to have to commit to. But that big wars have happened in the past without somebody having to, you know, a more just to motivate people than the actual war was going to cost.
Right. So the big thing, and to bounce off of that point, the thing that's important to remember is that Fountain was lost because the CFC or the Imperium, I can't remember what they called it. I think they were still the CFC at that point, understood the economics of war better than Test and managed to bankrupt them. And therefore, if these big power players were going to strike against the CFC another time, they had to fix that money problem. And so I think that the ISK, or the idea of what's interesting is that they almost didn't need a bankroller. In fact, one of the questions that I asked to Eep when he first was there was, if you pull the money out, are you even going to tell anyone? Because the illusion of funding was almost as good as actual funding for a lot of people. It was, in fact, unifying force. And I think going back to what CCP Siegel said, it's really important to remember that this is a single event. And there have been lots of single events in EVE. And in fact, Goonswarm in particular has utilized their unique resources, a la ridiculous amounts of people, in order to perform feats in EVE that no one else could accomplish. The ice interdiction, burning Jita, all these kinds of things are pretty good examples, which there were very little counterplay besides just riding through the storm. They exercised their will and they were able to perform those tasks. But then the question is, what comes next, which is what we're kind of discussing here now, right? Like if the bankers then just start running around and ruining the otherwise, you know, good nullsec meta, which A, not really, and B, I don't think they're going to do that, then yes, you have a significant problem. If what you have is an Imperium that has gotten really, really big and pissed off a lot of freaking people, and I1ISK was merely the flash in the powder that caused it all to ignite, then making a strong action against them would be a political action and potentially a mistake. It's better to let this play out and then see where the next phase leads us to.
Stephen, I'll go to you next, but I have one thing to counter that, because the costs of war are, I mean, the thing about it is that everything that Goonswarm has done was in the game. Like, yeah, maybe not the spy game, but that's part of the metagame, and everybody knows that's okay, but you can attack them back.
I mean, even that's not really okay. Like, a lot of the stuff that happens in the spy game is something that should not happen ever.
Oh, are you condemning
whole
it?
other topic.
Are you condemning it? Good.
Yeah, I am condemning it. Like, it's just a dirty fucking game. Like, I'm having more fun doing other things right now.
Well, you're saying that
Sorry.
but Goonswarm was famous for their metagame of spying and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the myth is famous. I think that the actuality of it is pretty sparse.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to bring in, if I could, and this might redirect it a little bit, is again the comparison of the money making. If it happens in the game, it seems like that's legitimate. Wealth building in the game seems legitimate. Because that's part of the war machine that you built. You captured those moons, they're generating income. You got the people to work for you in the ratting mines, that's legitimate. And the other thing that's legitimate is something we'll talk to later in the second part of the show, but I want to bring in Rivra to talk about this because it seems like maybe the new way to make gazillions of dollars is to put up your citadel and to leech off of JITA. It seems like that's the, offshore tax shelters might be a new thing, but that seems like it's in the opposed to outside the game.
Yeah, I think that's whether it stays a niche thing like it is now, or whether it becomes widespread. But yeah, that's inside the game, so I think people are less split about whether it's legit or not than they are about the I want ISK thing.
Because that seems to be generating a ton of income. And again, we'll come back to that topic. I did want to go back to Marconius. I think you made some pretty big revelations there. And that is saying, do you think that it was illegitimate for Goonswarm and the Imperium, I guess, at large to jump into these spy games? Did it get a little bit too dirty?
Yeah, I mean, I think with everything, there's sort of the reality and then the illusion of reality. And so part of the thing that I find with the spy game, because that's what I've been doing since I was in Brave, and then I've got roped into doing it again in Goonswarm, is you have things that you can legitimately spy on in game, right? You have emails that you can intercept from the Eve API. You can look at Corp chat, Alliance chat. You can listen into what people are saying on comms or what their external services are doing. But then you start getting into this whole other element that you see people cross, and that's when
they check out your Facebook.
Yeah, people start checking out who you are in real life and talking to you in different games. Getting your Battle.net ID and your Steam ID and coming up and talking to you in World of Warcraft while you're doing a raid. LOL noob, why are you still with Goonswarm? What the fuck, And that's kind of one of the things where it's that's way too far. And people have a perception that that's okay because Goonswarm sort of perpetrated the myth of what was possible in the spy game. And to a large extent, we just embraced that because it made us look really good, right? We did all this stuff and we won, and it was underhanded, but we won anyway. But whether we did or didn't do those things is kind of lost in the whole, Pandora's box that it opened.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that I wish we could just do in the game. Eve, to me, is infecting too much of my personal life, and I want it to just stay in the game at this point.
So
I love hanging out with people and meeting people in real life, but it just needs to stay.
Yeah. I did a lot of interviews for this article, and I ended up having to not use a lot of them because I wanted to tell the Goonswarm story, and a little bit of behind the curtain with writing, it can be really tricky sometimes because you want to touch on every single issue, but then you also can't write a novella of what's been happening on Goonswarm.
That's too bad.
40,000 words.
I don't know. Books have been written.
I would write that book, but I'm not getting paid to write that book. So at a certain
Let's
point,
do a Kickstarter.
Yeah, there you go. But I did all these interviews, and I one of the people I talked to was the Big Red Boat, and I think people have a lot of opinions about that person, but he said something to me that I thought was incredibly intelligent, and he said you can't say that Eve is real and then be surprised when people bring their real lives into the game. And I thought that was a really valid point to make, which is that when you say that Eve, everything you do in Eve matters, it's real, you're investing real human hours into it, you're giving up days of your lives to do these things in the game, and then people are finding ways, people are looking at your Facebook and stuff like that. It's awful. I'm not condoning it by any means, but I'm saying there's a part of me that thinks you create sort of this very slippery slope, and it's really hard to draw lines for some people, which is
yeah, because you can leverage in your real life abilities to this game. You can, if you have Excel skills, those are going to pay off. If you're a performer, look at us here. That's going to pay off.
Right.
Everything you do,
I
if
don't
you
know, nobody pays me shit to do
if
this.
you can sing
You're not getting paid.
all that adoration in the chat, that's all your payment. Yeah, but if you can sing, if you can do anything, you can leverage that into the game. So then where is the wall to say, you can do that, that's okay. In fact, that's really cool.
Right.
But don't go looking at somebody's Facebook.
Right. Like, yeah, where do you draw the line where you've put too much of yourself into the game, or you've brought too much of yourself into the game? And it's a weird thing. Like, it's a real nasty issue. And so, yeah, if you're talking about, kind of spy metagame and where it can lead, it can get real gross. I saw CCP Manifest said something in the chat that I wanted to address.
I saw that too. Go ahead.
So he said he wondered if people still would. That was a really interesting point to bring up, and I
think.
wanted to.
Sorry, I think you strobed. Can you restate the question? You strobed a little bit.
Oh, okay. So I'll quote him directly. He said, "I'm wondering if when I had bankrolled both sides, if people would still think it felt dirty, sort of like how special interest groups pay money to all candidates." And I think one of the big mistakes that I Want ISK made in this conflict was they got involved almost too heavy-handedly, because, and this is maybe something that we can talk about with how banks and casinos affect the metagame, which is that ISK almost funded too much money onto one side, and we didn't get a good fight. Like, people were pretty upset that I said this in the article, but I really feel like this war has been a huge disappointment. Like, MTACO was a fantastic fight. We had a few other good ones, but largely, like, I think everyone was excited for this conflict of the century, and instead Goonswarm kind of just folded in on itself and pieced out to LowSec. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that how do you even fight against the Money Badger Coalition?
I mean, here's the thing. It's not about the money. Like, and what I would have to say to respond to CCP Manifest is there might be more fights if, like, the game mechanics actually made it possible to do such. I mean, I think this whole thing has been like everybody trying to capitalize on this new form of warfare in EVE Online, and it doesn't generate the results that previous iterations of Solve Warfare did. And I mean, CCP, if you want something to like tout and like brag about, then like create something that's worth bragging about. Like, don't put it on the players to do it. Like, God, I mean, that's like the worst. If you want us to fight over something, give us something to fight over. Like, this whole thing is just completely arbitrary.
Yeah, but they can't make, like, certain systems super rich, because then the powerful sit on those.
They can totally do it. Like, they can just put the incentives in nullsec. Just give nullsec some incentives. So like,
yeah, but what are incentives? Be more specific than just something good. Like, and I don't want you to game design, but like, what are we talking here? Right. Wealth generation?
Hold on. I'm going to actually come in here and say that's ridiculous, because the whole reason why goons are in Declan was because that's where the best moons were. That's where, they moved there. Well, that's not the only reason, but like there is fighting over the R64 moons, and then they rebalanced that, and that was a big thing, and that's why the Fountain War happened. Like,
a lot of it
the idea of space being valuable, certain space being more valuable than other space, has been a conflict driver since time immemorial.
Yeah, but it's not the case anymore. And the only reason goons stayed in Declan for so long is because, like, goons are lazy. Goons are very lazy people. Like, we inherently don't like doing things. Like, to us, a good night was like undocking, chatting with people, and socializing, and not like, and sometimes blowing shit up. Yeah, that's fun too. But like, we could basically, until Phoebe happened, like, we could go anywhere in the galaxy in 15 minutes. Who cared what region you were staging in, right? So like, this whole thing about, oh, well, why aren't you guys fighting? Like, maybe there should be some parity. Like, maybe it's because goons don't have enough money. Like, no, goons have plenty of money. We just don't want to give you the fights, because we can totally win this war without them. Like, all we have to do is just use interceptors and crappy fleets that nobody wants to fight or nobody has fun doing, because that's what the game mechanics allows us to do. And we'll just min-max the shit out of it until everybody gets frustrated, bored, and fucks off.
Well, the thing that CCP can't fix, because if they did, they would probably be in a different business, psychology or something. But that is the blobbing and the safety in numbers, which is totally innate to, like, all kinds of species. But
I mean,
what happened here was basically
lots of feedback. Like, that's the whole point of the CSM, is the social feedback mechanism that it supposedly was like supposed to offer. Is like, hey, people in the game feel this is broken. Like, maybe you should address that. And for years, they've been like, okay, great, thanks for that feedback. And you never hear anything
Well, maybe
else come up.
because that's a hard one to crack. But the point is, it wasn't the money. The money was this match, right? The real fire was the people. Because as soon as Goonswarm got outclassed by a huge percentage, we're talking 1,200 to 800. We're talking 20. Yeah, they got outblobbed in a big way. Not even in a way they could do it. People overfished this. If they had and then when CO2 switched over, that was just, that was it. There was no way you guys in Imperium were going to form up to try to fight 2,500 people in one system. And not only because that's too many, but because tie-dye sucks.
Well, I think one of the important things is that Imperium prior to this was not an assailable force. There was no, I go back to that Reddit post from a year ago that was like, what would it take to take on Imperium? And literally the answer is you can't. And that was the mentality. And as Marcus pointed out, they had this really great web of lies that they had created about how they were impenetrable and how they had spies everywhere and how they'd stop you before they even got there and all this other stuff. And so I think that in the efforts of trying to assault what we saw as the Imperium, people brought a little bit too much to the table because they were fighting the Imperium that was perceived, not the Imperium that was.
I disagree with that.
Good point.
I think there was actually, if you look at the numbers, the first one they were kind of soft. The second one they were actually brought nearly 1,000 people, I think. Or more, 1,200. They brought 1,200. That's a big group.
Right. So once there was blood in the water, then people was like, this could actually happen. And then what you saw is the systematic rivalries that had been built up over the course of the last 5-6 years all kind of come to fruition. I still believe that without a huge bankroll, the war would have if just if that Material fleet that got bombed, in a couple of the other big key losses that happened at the very beginning, if those had happened even without a bankroll, you would have seen a lot of those people still jump in because a lot of people weren't there to make money. They were there to take down the Imperium.
Yeah, but what's it say about NC, my alliance, and what's it say about PL and Mercenary Coalition? All these places that it took money to secure them for, say, 3 months, 4 months to cover their losses. What's it say that was the thing that made them have the will to fight? That's part of warfare, is the finance part of it.
Well, I would definitely say that that's true for Mercenary Coalition. I would say that Pandemic Legion had plenty of reasons to jump in on the force, with or without huge bankrolls.
But there's a huge difference between having reasons, right? There was enough GUR out there amongst the community, but problem was nobody would ever form a large enough force to come and do anything about it, right? They could all GUR all they want to because it's easy to do that on Reddit or the forums or wherever the hell it is they do that. But unless they actually get together and say, we're going to commit to this, and that was always the problem. I mean, that the barrier to entry to going into a war like that, I guess required the motivational level of that much ISK to be put up there. But I do want to go back to that to that manifest comment that you made before, about would people feel that it was less dirty or something like that. I honestly, I don't think it was dirty. I don't think it was dirty in any way. I mean, it is what it is. We allow these casinos to exist in the game. They're another form of rich entity out there. It's not about dirty, and I don't know that it would have made any difference if they were funding both sides. So now what we need in EVE somehow is for the rich entities to motivate us to have conflict in EVE. I mean, that's just crazy.
Yeah, I feel like at that point they would actually be living up to their names as gods because we would just be their little ants fighting each other in their dumb wars. But I agree. I don't find what I Want ISK did dirty at all. It's almost amoral. They just did what they did, and now we're all in a sort of post world where we have to kind of figure out what's going to happen next and whether or not something like this should happen again.
I mean, I think one of the hardest things right now is because the proximity in time to this war really kind of clouds the conversation about casinos, right? You cannot have a conversation about casinos right now and how they're supported by CCP to be able to kind of operate at the scale that they do because of things like API crest changes and things like that have taken place, recently. Because of the war, because of the political stuff that is involved with it, the people, the names, the propaganda, and everything else, right? That article right there, I mean, one of the things that I saw with that article, as far as responses from a number of people out there, right, was, oh, the Mittani cares about, kids and addicts, right? Because they're going to sit there and they're going to come at that angle from it. Now, maybe it's a valid topic. It just can't be had amongst kind of, the community out there because everybody is still my teaming this shit.
Yeah, and I think that's what I realized real hard when that article came out, which is that there is a vast majority of people within the EVE community who do not want to have this conversation because they can't even approach it without divorcing what the Mittani, like the merit of the Mittani's argument versus just who he is as a person or who he is as a persona in EVE Online. And so there are all these people being like, oh, like, yeah, now he's coming with like the moral high ground argument. But it's like, that was frustrating for me because it's like, but it's a good argument. Like, we should be asking questions about whether or not, 15-year-olds, and they are like 1% of EVE's population. Like in that article, I put CCP Quant's player demographics chart, but still 1% of the population is still like, that's one human life maybe. Or like, even if it's just one kid who has a gambling addiction and it happens to be expressed through an EVE Online casino, that's still a bad thing. Like that's still an awful thing that can be happening. And so that's the conversation we need to be having. We need to be having a conversation about whether the fact that these casinos, they're like, there's no incentive on their part to not prey on gambling addiction. I think Mittani made fair points with that too, which is the fact that if the only way to compete against a casino is to build your own casino, then you make an arms race where each casino tries to be more exploitive of the audience using it to get them to spend more money within the casino. And I think that's a dangerous road to go down. There's like a lot of
that's very interesting points.
The flip side of this, right, is yes, okay, they helped sponsor a war. Now what sparked their sponsorship of that war? Okay, maybe a couple of different things out there. All right, that starting off with the bankers that used to be in SMA and things like that, right? But on the flip side, you've also got what they do that benefits the community in terms of how they support streamers, how they support streamers not only on the side of the MBC in this, right, but also some Mittani.com streamers, for God's sakes.
That's right.
Goons, all right.
Laz.
And then Laz, okay, and then how they also support player events out there. Which I understand is marketing, but for those player events, it's marketing for the casinos, right? But for the player events, that's for the players.
I also think that the moral high ground is a very difficult thing to ask within a game that actively promotes and advocates scamming or other forms of manipulation in order to get your way up. I mean, I think that the reason why you see such a hostility against the Mittani specifically saying that is because this is the same guy who actively advocated recruiting players into EVE, not because they wanted to play EVE, but because they wanted to be terrible to other people. So I would say that if you're exploiting like these incredibly negative antisocial behaviors, is that any better than exploiting gambling addiction?
Statement I've ever heard. Like, you're recruiting people.
You heard it here on TIS.
You're recruiting people to come play a video game because they're horrible to other people. Like, what's so different than like an EVE, like a WoW guild or any other MMO guild being like, hey, like all these other schmucks on this server we play on suck. Like, come terrorize them with us. Like, I mean, it's just internet trolling. Like, yeah, I'm not like apologizing. Well, I guess that's I'm apologizing for it. But like, I guess the thing is like, it's one of those things where everybody's internet community is better than everyone else's. And so when you say something like he's the only person that's ever done that, oh my God, like I'm just sitting here rolling my eyes because it's just bullshit. Like,
I'm not suggesting that he's the only one, but he is the one bringing up the moral high ground in this article. And so what I'm saying is that if you're going to be the one questioning somebody else, if you're going to be in the, throwing rocks, and then you're the same guy who's advocating, hey, by the way, this game is great because you can, these other guys have taken, worked 3 years for this money, and then you're going to scam it from them and laugh in their face, and then post it on the internet, or do all this other stuff and all these things that he has actually advocated and told stories about in his various different meetings. And I'm not even talking about like he told somebody to commit suicide thing, but like, I'm not saying that he's the only one, but I'm saying that I'm going to question his motivation.
So,
yeah, but can you
strip
understand?
that out?
No,
What does it matter about his motivation?
Like,
about if the underlying subject holds some sort of relevance?
Can we just talk about the separation between like I play a video game as Marconius Porkbutt. Matani plays a video game as the Matani, but Marconius Porkbutt, aka Mark in real life, and Matani, aka Alex in real life, have very different motivations than their people that they're fucking RPing as. Like,
you're absolutely correct, which is why I will still have a drink with the Matani.
Like, it's okay to say, like, come play this game where we act a certain way and we do certain things because we can do that in a game because it's not real.
Right. So
then like
let Steven get in here.
Okay,
well,
well,
you can finish
let's
your
not do this one thing out of game because it's actually bad. Like,
right.
This out of game thing is bad. And we can all agree, like, as people, like, that has some, definite negative effects.
We have Steven for only 10 more minutes. Let's let him...
I mean, I can stay for longer, like it doesn't.
Awesome.
The conversation goes long.
I knew if we starved you long enough, you'd want to stay.
It's a Friday night. He doesn't have anything going on.
What an EVE Online podcast. No, so I think as someone... It's really interesting because I am not connected to the EVE politics like a lot of you guys are. My fascination with EVE is purely because I like talking about it to other people. And that's what I've almost built like my entire freelance career on, is these EVE articles where I get to show people like really weird things in EVE Online. And it gives me sort of this interesting perspective because I look at what the Matani does and I find it disappointing because I don't think, I think Ash has a valid point in that you can't be the villain and then try and take certain angles. And I find it almost a bit disappointing that Alex even wastes time doing it because all he's doing right now, I feel like in the last, if I have to criticize him for a second, in the last couple of months, I feel like he's really diluted his branding, so to speak, in the sense that his messaging is all over the place, where he's trying to be the threatening villain, he's trying to be the threatening bad guy. At the same time, he's talking about how gambling addiction in kids is an awful thing. But then he's, advocating for trolling people within a game. And you're right, Mark, there's totally a distinction between exploiting gambling addiction in individuals and making someone rage because you blew up their ship and now you're taunting them within the bounds of the game. But I do think that you can't have your cake and eat it too in that sense. You can't be a bad person in the game, but then also have good moral arguments or trying to espouse good moral arguments. It muddies things. And frankly, I think the reason, when I saw this article and I saw the reception, I wasn't mad at the EVE community for the way they were reacting. I was a bit disappointed because I hoped that we could have a conversation about the banks and the casinos, and that wasn't really happening in places like our EVE. I was disappointed, honestly, with people like the Matani that, I sit down and I ask him questions. I'm just relaying his answers back to people. That's all I'm really doing in these articles. And I was just really disappointed because I feel like his spin has failed. It's gotten to a point where people can't even trust a single thing that comes out of his mouth because they have it I feel like it's come back and bit him in the ass. He played a game, he spun up this awful evil persona, and it's gotten out of control to the point now where you're seeing the Imperium is actively damaged by their own vilification of themselves.
It wasn't even that they were evil, it was that they were untrustworthy. So you never knew if they were spinning you or not. And so you can't ask to say, here, I want to tell you some truth when you're a known liar. That doesn't work.
Right. Because people will reject the truth.
But here's the other thing. Here's the other thing, though. If it were any other messenger, it wouldn't get heard anyway. Because if you're a Care Bear or somebody who doesn't like killing things, you're not going to be listened to. Like, we had this guy that joined our alliance, and I'm not afraid to say it was a guy from Nully, who I consider to be an awful influence. Gene Lerner, or something like that. He joins our NC Dot without any introduction at all. Like, there's a process that everybody goes through so they can be publicly and humiliated or whatever before they get in. Vetted.
Vetted into your elite.
Yeah, and the whole thing is, hey guys, you get to pick who you fly with. So all if somebody applies to a different corporation, I can actually go and like throw stuff in that thread. Well, he bypassed all that, and so I just put something up that said, "Who the hell let this guy in? This guy's awful." I got totally shut down, almost thrown out. But the point was, if I had not started out saying, who the heck, I said, who let this shitlord in, basically. And lady was like, well, if you weren't a jackass about it, maybe people would have listened to you. And my counter to that was, if I'd said, hey, who let this guy in? Because he's really not a good influence. I would have been trolled out of those forums. So it's Eve is kind of eats its own babies in that way. Like, the whole place eats its own babies that way.
I think that we really are going through a cultural shift. I mean, it wasn't so many years ago when there was a discussion about how CCP shouldn't do anything about Erotica 1, right? Like, we have not, chronologically, not much time has passed since that point, but I think that culturally we've changed significantly about what we accept and don't accept as a community.
No question about that.
It's interesting, like,
It's
there's been a
true
big
because you can go
cultural
back to
shift.
you go back to the Matani incident at FanFest, right? And there's all these people nowadays that throw it out there about how terrible it was, and it was the wrong thing to do, right? But the whole idea of cyberbullying really hadn't made its way into certainly into Eve at the time.
I also have to say his apology was stronger than anybody else's apology like ever on this, and nobody talks about that. He gave his entire wealth to that guy. That guy actually said, yeah, it was no big deal after a while. Like, it wasn't, he corrected that situation, and he's still burned by it these days.
Sure. But the whole idea of cyberbullying was not the thing in Eve. It wasn't the thing in the mainstream media at that point. I mean, you go back and you start looking for stories on cyberbullying and things like that, and the dates, there's just not a whole lot of material out there. It hadn't reached that level of, oh God, we're so hyped about this and really need to get on it kind of mentality. Whereas nowadays, literally every issue is something worthy of going to war over. Like in words. Not war in game. I did think trillions to get a war in game.
I would say, so far as, like, when the Matani did say that, at the time, I don't even think anybody noticed it as being that much out of place until after the fact, right?
I think Eve News 24, Riverini's founder, I think promoted that very hard. That was one of the rifts between the two places. Brought more attention to it.
That's not even what spawned the anti-harassment thing. It wasn't until the Erotica 1 stuff where CCP finally started to get on board with kind of the anti-harassment things that possibly extended outside the game.
No, I think CCP did a huge corrective movement with after Matani had done that thing. I think there was, even Hilmar came out and said, okay, it's time for us to grow up, basically. And he wasn't talking about, he was not talking about Matani exclusively. He was talking about the whole community. Like, they used to say, oh, we're going to shoot you in the face, and there was a lot of that kind of stuff.
It was an evolution even for the company.
Yeah.
Okay? It's been an evolution over time. And where you see the community out there, and however you want to say it, the community, the air quote community, whatever the word you want to use for it, right? The vocal minority of players who exist in places like Reddit or forums or Twitter or Slack or wherever the hell it is they are. There is this huge push out there. There's this huge push to protect minorities and to help all. Oh God, you can't say this, and God, don't call somebody retarded because hashtag Mental Health Awareness Month, and all this kind of stuff out there that just did not exist in this game.
Cinco de Mayo is not a holiday.
4 years ago, all of that stuff.
I don't mind telling you, I'm Mexican. It's not a Mexican holiday.
I will, yeah, and to go back to that, like, I will definitely, and I have before, like, told people to kind of cool off on the whole Matani harassment thing, because what's important to note is that, like I said, within the Eve community, honestly, at the time, most people didn't see it as a gigantic deal. What the problem at that moment was that was the fan fest in which Dust was revealed. And so there was the huge PS3 contingency and a lot of outside of our world media. And in fact, there was a big movement about like, hey, why are all of these people, kind of laying judgment on the way that we do things? And even the Matani's own kind of response said, well, we got to see what kind of CCP we even have nowadays. And that's why they did the Burn Jita, because he said, if CCP is the same CCP as it always has been, then they will herald this thing as a wonderful moment of emergent gameplay. And if CCP has become soft, then they will act against it, which means two things. One, CCP did, in fact, embrace it quite a bit, proving that they were still the company that they were before. But also, like, that was a threat. We thought that, there was a very real threat that EVE Online and CCP had just gone in the way of, like, WoW and all that stuff. And so it was a gigantic cultural kind of confusion. And it's also worth noting the Matani did step down. He just was then told that he could not continue to serve in the next iteration.
CSM.
So, yeah, in the next CSM. So I don't know. It's a really weird thing, and I think it's an unfortunate thing that haunts him, because there are definitely other things that he has said and done in the past that I think make better examples to counterpoint against some of the things he is doing and saying now. But that just happens to be the big flashy one that everybody attracts to. Oh, he told somebody to kill themselves.
Hey, this is a great conversation. We're going to keep it. It's a great conversation. We're going to keep it going for another half hour. Then we'll have the intermission, and then we'll talk about citadels and the offshoring. Okay, did I just kill the? Did I just kill the vibe? Actually, we need to talk about, and I did want to get to this. It's too bad that the first hour went so fast. But Stephen, I want to talk about like the rest of your career and how you got started writing and all that kind of stuff. Like,
Sure, yeah.
because there's a lot of people who are, everybody's trying to be do something, for work that they like, and writing about video games is probably one of them.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, I'm down to talk about that for sure.
Awesome. Do we have anything else that we want to talk about as far as this goes, the article that came out? I have one more thing, actually, if I can just answer my own question. And that was one thing that really made me laugh. It was the rewriting of history. Like, first of all, the two articles that came out, probably that you were responding to, or that were the other side, that were the other side of what you were writing about. Those articles had Lenny Kravitz saying that he had done this because he wanted the old goons back that were non-toxic, that were nice guys and they were funny. And the key word there is funny. One person's funny is another person's rude.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a disassociation with that. Bullying, yeah. And because I'll tell you what, the goons of 2006 through 2009 were not funny. Like, to me, they were not funny, and they were not, non-toxic. They were very toxic. They said some terrible things. There are still echoes of it now when older or some people try to pick up the same strains of teasing that happened a long time ago. And I'll give you an example.
They didn't create that in EVE, though.
They didn't create it, but they perfected it.
Existed on a widespread basis, and in some ways still does around.
Well, I think that they actually exacerbated it because they had no strength in the game. They
may
were
have just been coordinated with it, but
So prior to the Great War, I think Andrew even said this, Andrew Groen, prior to the Great War, the old factions were factions of ideology, right? So different people felt that EVE should be different things, and they went to war over it. And that's basically what fueled a lot of the wars pre-Great War. But with the Great War, when Goons won, it's almost like their ideology won, and it began to infect EVE Online as a whole. And that's where you got a lot of that, like, be the villain kind of mentality. And I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm just saying that it happened.
Yeah, like,
Right.
Sorry, why couldn't this place be about building things? Like, instead of destroying them. I'm going back to that because I think it's interesting. It's a sci-fi game. It's futurism. Why does it have to be about the constant tearing down of things? Anyway,
That's
Stephen?
actually the amazing thing that I always think about whenever since I first started playing EVE. The amazing thing about EVE is that unlike the real world, there actually is no resource shortage, right? Like, asteroids repopulate, moons continue to generate. Like, inevitably, if we decided to, we just could never shoot each other again and live in Shangri-La. We don't, and I think that tells us more about us than about the game.
Well, yeah, no, I think at the same time too, like ultimately this is a game, and so people want entertainment, and it just turns out that blowing someone up and taking their stuff is really entertaining for a vast majority of people. So it's one of those weird things because like Eve can parallel and echo real life in like really alarming and amazing ways, but then at the same time it also boils down that Eve is a game that people play for fun, or they play for some form of, not fun necessarily, but they play for some sort of satisfaction. And I think, yeah, like I think that there's some truth to what you're saying, but I don't necessarily think that like the future is going to be this hellscape of destruction just because EVE Online is.
I think it's also interesting. It's brought up in chat. People also forget that it's a role-playing game, and while you're not in CVA, everybody that plays EVE to an extent is role-playing to a degree. Like,
yeah, that was me saying that over there.
Yeah, I thought it was a really good point, Derek. I saw the,
Well, because
I saw the comment, and it's really good. I think you should elaborate on that.
It's crazy the reaction. Okay, the reaction, and he's really the ultimate character of it in the game, right? And I don't want this to keep coming back to the Mittani as though he's the only example. But the reaction to the words he says when he's out there, which he knows have a double-edged public perception out there. You know, his people are going to take it one way, other people are going to take it, but he's role-playing, people.
Yeah, and I mean, and to the same degree, like you had a host on your show, Open Comms, who left recently, and he talked about kind of getting stuck in the dichotomy between like his role-play character and who he was like in real life, and I just thought that was an interesting thing that sort of came up and then flew by that nobody really paid attention to. And it's like, yeah, I role play as Marconi as Sport Butt, a entity in EVE, and it's not me in real life. And I think a lot of us sort of tend to forget that even though I'm not like role playing as an Amarr slave owner, like I'm still role playing, even if
somebody asked the question out to Radioactive PB, is the Mittani role playing on the Meta Show too? Serious question. You know what? I think that he is. When I watch him, okay, I think he's role playing, the great leader. Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, just like as an insider and a personal friend of Alex's, like, yeah, he is. I mean, and to anyone who is really talking about anything in EVE Online, and you're talking about your character, you're posting as your character, you are role playing. Like, you are. Get over it.
I mean, you gotta let's go back to it, right? Let's go back to basics. You are playing a role. It doesn't matter if you've decided to take on the role of a traitor or you've decided to take on, and this is what's different than a lot of other video games, because in a lot of other video games you can just switch over, or like one moment may not have any impact on another. But because EVE has a history, and because you have a legacy and you build a narrative for yourself one way or another, inevitably you are playing a role. So when the Mittani goes on there and talks, he is playing the role of the commander of the Imperium.
What about when he's talking to his generals and that information gets leaked? Was he playing or was he telling the truth?
Well, it's all playing because it's all a game, right? Like nobody's actually going to war, right?
So when he's disparaging CCP Manifest, or when he's saying that he can get these guys in the real media to write what he wants, is he role playing or is that actually him?
Well, I would say that he as a character, as the role that he is playing, he is leveraging the resources to his disposal, right? And in one of the resources that the Mittani has carefully constructed for himself is control of the media. And the reason why was because actually after the whole FanFest thing with the CSM, he even said, I did this because I realized that the media has more strength than the CSM does. And so he made the choice of having a media, control of the narrative, control of the media as a aspect of his role of commander of the goons. And therefore, yes, it bleeds into real life. And I'm not saying that he's absolved of that. I'm not saying that Alex,
behind the scenes stuff, right?
Right. I'm not saying that Alex is not guilty of what he does. But what I'm saying is that he is.
Hey, let's call him Mittani
as a role.
Let's keep it in the game.
Yeah.
Why are you doxing him, man?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Somebody didn't know he was named Alex.
Manifest is in the chat. I can't believe you just did that. Oh,
Oh,
Yeah.
His name is public knowledge because
Oh,
he was,
I
on,
mean,
he
I
was
think-
no, he was on the CSM.
so are Facebook profiles, dude.
Yeah,
You
my
draw
name's a
that
picture
line.
already. I'm not telling people where they are.
So I have really strong thoughts on this whole thing on roleplay, and it's interesting. I'm not going to tell you guys to go read this article, but if you're listening to this, you can. There is something on Rock Paper Shotgun where this other article was. It's not on the front page anymore, but it was published yesterday or 2 days ago. You can go look for it if you want to, because I recently did an experiment with role playing on a Neverwinter Nights fantasy server. And I learned some really revealing lessons, and I think it's really informed my opinion on roleplay. And people are free to disagree with it, but I do firmly believe at this point that you are not separate from the role you play, because the role you play in a game is ultimately a form of self-expression. And even if the role you play is a sort of different type of character, if you're kind of a nice dude and in game you're playing an asshole, that doesn't mean that the two are separate. It just means that you're a nice dude who has an asshole side to him that can come out when you feel like you're not going to be held publicly responsible for what you're doing.
thank you.
People think that roleplay is like a mask you wear where you like take it off and you're just a different person, and it's not. Roleplay, to me at least, is a mask that you put on, and it reveals the true self. It allows you to feel like you, and especially online too, because then it becomes roleplay with an anonymity. So like if you're sitting around a D&D table and you're role playing together, you know that person, you know what he's like outside of the game. But when you're playing online, you have anonymity. And the Mittani, everyone, like, people know a lot about him, but he's still anonymous on the internet. People don't have an idea of what he's like outside of the game. People,
I'll be honest. Even having met him a couple times in real life, all right.
right,
That's
but
what you get for catching your breath. You get cut off.
Well,
That's fine. No.
Even having met him in real life, right? But it's at a place like, let's say, Vegas, where in a way he's still on stage.
Right. And I've
The
had,
guy with the sunglasses on his head and the red shirt is probably not the guy who's like, sitting on the couch with his wife watching Netflix or something.
right.
Wouldn't it be scary if he was?
That
But,
would
like,
be pretty funny.
I think that there is a part of him that is that person, and I think that's fine. Like it's not. I definitely think when you are doing these things, when you are playing a role, you kind of blow it out, like you exaggerate and you kind of highlight certain parts and you diminish other parts. But I think that ultimately that there is a truth about the person and the role that they play, or there's a truth about the role that someone plays that you can use to inform about who they are as a person. Always.
I totally agree. I'm so glad you said that, because I remember somebody who was on CSM said, when they asked him, what's Eve? And he said, Eve is a place where nice people can come and do bad things. And I think it was a very popular CSM, I'm forgetting his name, it was Troubadour or something like that, or Trevor. And, he looked like a nice guy, but I totally disagreed with that, because I find that it's very difficult for me to do anything, actually. Like, I feel bad killing people, but that's because I can't cross certain lines in my brain to allow myself to do it, even in an anonymous video game where I'm supposed to do it. In fact, I joined Eve so that I could try to do that.
I would argue that in Eve, the bigger threat isn't gambling addiction and its impact on people, but rather people losing themselves in their characters.
Well, then we're just talking about addiction, because there's kind of a part of that in Eve, like in any video game really, where you just like dedicate 23 and a half hours a day to like doing something in this game, and you don't go out and you see sunlight unless there's like the servers down.
Yep.
That's something that we don't really talk about in general in the gaming industry and like a lot of what we do, but it is out there. And it's interesting too on the roleplay topic. A lot of streamers are essentially role playing. They have their stream name, and a lot of that's because, again, like they want that anonymity. Like they're going to be a different person on their stream than they are in real life. It doesn't mean that they're a totally different person, but they're just highlighting certain aspects of their personality in a different way.
Man, if games could like inform you on who you were, I would be in a lot of trouble in certain ways.
I don't think you are who you play in a game, but I think that they do inform a certain truth. You can ascertain something about someone by the way that they play a game. And it might not be a direct sort of like, oh, you're a jerk in game, you're a jerk in real life. But there is sort of indirect truths that I think you can use to inform about a person. It's not like you can just look at the Mittani as a character and then make assumptions about who he is in real life. What you would need to do is you need to know who the Mittani is as a character, and then who the Mittani is out of game, and then you trace the two connections, and you can find things. But I think the mistake a lot of people do is they see who the Mittani is in game and they just assume in real life he's like this genocidal, awful maniac, and it's not true. Like that's not who he really is. But it does speak a truth. Well, if Mark says it.
I mean, he's a little sadistic, but yeah, he's a nice guy. Like, I mean, I don't know, like he's just a little bit of sadism going.
Yeah,
on,
does he like
but-
pull wings off flies because
No,
they're
nothing
flies?
Like that. That's psychotic. No,
Exactly.
nothing like that. I mean,
Yeah,
he just
not
likes
cackling
a good,
villain.
He just likes a good, a good time.
You know, this makes me think that
Like,
Rebro over there is actually a cutthroat in real life.
Party with him.
Well,
He
like
will party you under the table.
for me, I like to use Eve as an opportunity to explore things with a different consequence set, right? So, like, even if that means I get to be terrible to people and then see how that plays out, or I get to, like, I've never scammed anybody in real life. I've also never scammed anybody in Eve, but it's super tempting to do that. Like,
But you will now.
can I take a person and convince them somehow to give me 4+ billion ISK? Like, can I take somebody who's actually earned all this stuff and have them give it away to me because of the fact of something I said? Like, that is crazy.
Right.
But like, for real, this is true story. Like, in my real life, in this last year, I've taken over, or I've started trying to do like the
Take a second. Do you really want to say this?
No, I do. It's fine.
Because it's going to be out there.
So in my real life, I've formed my own company and we're working on our own stuff. So I've gone from worker to business owner / leader with hiring and other stuff. And so, there's a lot of things about that are terrifying, absolutely terrifying. And so the idea of like, hey, I'm going to actually take over this corporation in Eve and see if I can get all of these moving pieces to work in a way, hone those personal skills of mine, because those are real skills that need to be exercised, that needs to be practiced. And so in that sense, Eve allows you to take on a different persona with a different set, or a market trader, right? Like, there's no way that I'm going to spend enough real life money to get into market trading at the get-go without being painfully sorry for doing so. But in Eve, I can experiment with the idea of like, well, what does it mean to have a market trend? What does things look like when it's just a fake thing versus a real thing, or how do you read those things? And in that way, Eve is uniquely valuable.
Okay, that's a great point. And if I could, I just want to pivot on this one point. One example, actually, the reason that I left EN24 was because I was kind of finished writing for a fan site. Like I've done that and I couldn't really do it anymore without justifying in some way. So the reason I came to TMC, and I think I've expressed this a few times, was because it actually allowed me, first of all, it allowed me a managerial set of circumstances that I could practice in, that I needed to on a C level, that I need to for my actual real life. So Eve, if you use it right, can be a simulator into areas that you're afraid are too costly in real life. And that's the smart money when you play Eve. Like, if you can stretch yourself and get some of the fear out of the way, you can improve as a person using this simulator that a lot of people in the world from all over the world will participate in. So you can see what it's like to talk to a Russian guy.
Corporate middle management online.
Exactly.
No, but I think even like with if you have social anxiety, Eve Online can be this wonderful space for you to like learn how to become a bolder person. And I've talked to people specifically like in Eve Online. I've done articles, I've done interviews with people where they've talked about like low sec pirates and the characters that they play and how that like improved their life vastly, because in real life they were like, I was a loser and then I became this low sec pirate. And it sounds really lame to say this, but like became this low sec pirate and they learned what it was like to be a bit of a badass and to kind of talk smack and have a bit of, to stand up for yourself. And it begins to inform who you are as a person. And it begins to change who you are as a person. And I think that's an important distinguishing with roleplay too, is like Eve Online is essentially consequence free if you're playing it right.
Yeah.
You can experiment with it and you can do these things. And really like it's a video game. Everyone's there. They should understand that it's a video game. And so yeah, like propagandists can do things that in real life would be awful. Like no one should be doing some of the things that propagandists do in Eve, or like the manipulation and stuff like that. But in Eve Online, that's okay. But I still think that the consequences of those actions personally can still change who you are as a person.
Yeah, I think I went backwards. I used to be really cool, and now I'm a gamer.
Me too.
I was like,
I'll say that.
I was a good-looking young man. I had ladies.
People are allowed to disagree with the point, but I think for me personally, and this is really what it boils down to, is everyone's going to be different. But for me personally, the first time I scammed someone in EVE Online, I felt terrible. I felt terrible for days about
You
it.
were a dirty scammer.
I did it one time. I did it one time.
That's all it takes,
You
man.
gave it back, didn't
I
you?
did.
Get out.
I did. I did a an article. One of my first EVE Online articles was I ganked with code for a week,
Oh, I did it for research.
and I followed code around, and
The
I
research.
and I
Excuse.
did like gonzo journalism.
Many
where
men have been
I
found in-
adopted the mantle of code, and I went around with him ganking miners. And then not only that, the guys in code were like, okay, you need to, because the whole thing with code is you gank the miner and then you have to convo them, and that's when you start like the manipulation and like you break that person until they buy a mining permit. And so he's like, I want you to do this. And so I'm the person kind of being the point of contact on this. And so in a sense, I'm role playing. I'm doing this. I'm not really this person in real life, but I'm pretending to be this awful asshole who's like harassing this miner in game and being like, you need to buy the mining permit, man. And
Hey, Harleen in chat said they read that article.
oh, there you go. I was really proud of that article. But
Can we talk about your career? Yeah, can we talk about your career as long as we're talking about articles that you wrote? Like, how did you get into it, and what made you do it?
Okay, so this is funny. This was 2 years ago, and I was 24 at the time, and I realized my life was going nowhere. And I had nothing like a good, like when people are like, what's your 5-year plan? I was like, not being dead is my 5-year plan. And so I just decided one day I was at this job I hated, and I just didn't really have anything great going on in like my life career wise. And I decided, like, I love video games and I've always loved writing. I need to figure out how to turn that into a career path. And so I did what I think a lot of people do, which is I decided, well, I don't really know how to start writing about video games. It's what I want to do. I'll just make a blog and do it there, and hopefully that works out. And so that's what I did. I started a blog. It started with like 8 people. I really treated it like a business because I was like, I don't know how to get a job at like IGN or some of these big places. I'll just make my own IGN, was my naive thought. Awfully naive. Don't ever do that. But I ran this blog like a business. We had contributors, and we were really organized and stuff like that. And I was putting in 8 hours after my normal work shift, and I did that for about 8 months, and I burned myself out horribly on it. It was terrible. But around that time, I started learning about freelance video game journalism and what that is, or just freelance journalism in general. And it's a really simple concept, which is that places that put out articles and like news websites, basically all the major media websites, there's too much going on in the world for them to ever cover it internally. And so what they do is they outsource things to freelance journalists who are just contract workers who will come and write an article for them, and then they'll just pay them for it. And in video games, it's really popular. All of the websites use freelance journalists. And so I read a book. It's by Nathan Minier. If you're interested in reading it, it's called Up, Up, Down, Down, Left. I need to Google it.
Left, right.
I'll do it.
BA start select.
Yeah, like it's a play on that code. Up, up, down, down, left. It's called Up, Up, Down, Down, Left, Right. But then right isn't. It's a stupid pun. Right is like right. And it's a fantastic book that just breaks down how you can pitch an editor an idea for an article, or how you can get work as a freelance video game journalist. And so I use that as my Bible, basically. And I just started writing for websites. So I started with MMOs because that was my area of expertise. And so EVE Online was the MMO I was most experienced in. I've been MMORPG.com's resident EVE Online columnist for over a year now. And from there, I just kept pitching bigger websites once I got more confident, and yeah, it just grew from there.
That's
and that
awesome.
goes back to what I was saying, which is that while in Eve, it isn't real, the problems the challenges that you need to solve to be successful in Eve are similar to or the same as the problems that you need to solve for real life functions.
Because EVE Online EVE Online, like the reason why EVE Online is an amazing game is because it is inherently social, and real life is inherently social, and it's the only MMO that is like that. Like you can't prosper in EVE Online by being a nobody. You have to. You'll burn. Well, like, I really think because like people do, but like I don't think they enjoy themselves. I think the
Well.
people who enjoy themselves are the people who make friends and they solve problems together and they get sort of involved in whatever small bubble of a community in EVE Online they're a part of. Being like a totally solo pilot, I think in EVE Online is a sad way to live.
I like the immersion.
And that's why Eve is so real, and that's why people like just it's in them, right? You know, and it kind of reaches out there, and it's why people are always referencing. They're always referencing Rome or something in real history or some other aspect out there of real politics or whatever regarding this game, because they can draw some not necessarily accurate parallels, but close enough for them to be able to latch onto it.
It's all people. Like it's just people interacting with people. That's all society is. That's all humanity is. That's everything is just people interacting with people. And EVE Online is fundamentally people interacting with people in some form.
And that's why it runs off the rails sometimes.
Yeah, because people are awful.
Well, because there's no line between people and RP people.
Yeah,
There's
fair
no
point.
line. All right, so thanks for that, because that's really interesting. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in writing, and I know that industry is like it's new, right? Like this is a new medium. Entertainment's not new, but
Well, and it's new, and now it's changing because YouTube's shown up, and they're like, haha, screw you, journalists.
what do you think of the streaming like stuff that's come on in the last few years?
I think it's great. Like I'm always technically, yes, I'm kind of anchored myself to a shrinking medium, which is like print journalism. But I think like it's technology advancing, it's people getting what they want. People are happy, they want these things. That's fine. Like, I think a lot of the problem, and this is going to get way philosophical, but like a lot of problems like in America is because there's old business strangling innovation because they want to stay in power. And I don't ever want to be that type of person. So even though I'm in like an older business, I don't want to like stifle YouTube or ever like talk smack about those guys.
It's one more step towards idiocracy and being able to just sit on your chair and take a shit in it at the same time.
There's
while you're watching.
Totally.
There's a really good book called sorry, Stormy.
I don't personally, streaming is honestly, it feels weird to say this, but I feel like I am actually just too old to get like YouTube or streaming. I certainly love being on like streams and talking, but yeah, like when I hear about people who like, they don't watch TV anymore, they just watch YouTube channels or Total Biscuit or whatever, that I don't understand that.
Yeah, I've seen that in action.
Any sense to me. Why would you watch someone play a video game when you could just play the video game?
Because, I think because they want the story, and playing the video game is actual work at some point, or
Right.
it's time.
I don't get it.
I liken it to why I would watch baseball or football, right? But because I just can't go out there and go play baseball or football, not anymore, anyways, right? But I can't watch golf.
So,
Screw that, man.
do you have-
I'll go play golf because I can.
do you have sore fingers that you can't play a video game? Like sprained knuckles?
But
He's getting old.
it's not necessarily
Arthritic.
just watching someone play a video game. I think half of it is
It's
for
the
the
community.
commentary as well. Because if
Well,
you watch,
clearly, yeah.
like Dirk was saying, if you watch football, if you mute it, is it as exciting as it is listening to the announcer? I mean, now they don't do the commentary.
Depends. There are a lot of tights out there.
Yeah.
I'll say that I watch Day 9 not because of the things that Day 9 is doing, but rather I want to know Day 9's opinions about those things.
And I think that's fair, and that's really what it boils down to. Is like you have these fantastic personalities, and I said I don't know why people watch Total Biscuit. I sometimes watch Total Biscuit, but I think it's also maybe I'm not the most unbiased person to talk about it too, because I'm also a part of a medium. Like video games as a medium is something like I play like a metric shit ton of video games in a week, and so I don't need someone to tell me what they think of a video game because I'll likely just want to get my own opinion on it anyway. And I get that there's other people that don't want that. They just have their $60 and they don't know where to spend it, so they want someone that they trust to tell them.
That's true. It's your work. Why would you relax to your work? Last thing, do you stream?
I've attempted it in the past, but streaming is tough because that's the other thing. Is so like in my industry, it makes a lot of sense to be someone who is good on camera and can be literate on in front of a video camera and can talk and be charismatic, because that's just the way the industry is headed. So I've tried streaming, but you get into this real awkward place where there's no one on your stream. but you still need to act like there's people on your stream, because if you don't act like people on your stream, the people that do pop into your stream don't want to be there because you're not having fun. And so like there's this weird sort of like, there's the same reason I could never get into blogging almost, because I was just painfully self-aware the whole time that I was just spouting shit into like the internet and no one was there to care.
Hi, I'm
It's-
just talking to a camera.
Yeah,
Hey,
like it's
Didn't Newt Gingrich make a speech to an empty hall?
right, and like I could never do that if I came
Debate.
out
Well,
with
people do
Sharon.
that all the time, but
Yeah,
That's
like,
true. No, it's an interesting thing because it's kind of it's metaphysical in some way, isn't it?
right.
If
Yeah.
a tree falls while I'm here alone streaming, does it really fall?
Yeah, it's weird to be like talking to yourself. So like I've done some streaming for MMORPG.com before, and that's fantastic because you have an install base. So I turn on the stream and there's 100 people there, right away watching, and that's actually a lot of fun. Starting streaming from yourself, like I have so much respect for those people because
Are
they
you
all
on
started
a-
from nowhere.
Were you on like a PC gamer stream this week?
Yeah, so like PC Gamer is one of the websites I frequent, or my bylines are at PC Gamer quite a lot, and they'll have me onto their podcast infrequently just to be a talking head.
Well, we're so happy you joined us too.
Yeah,
Right,
this has been great.
right now we're going to shift. Please stick with us if you want. We're going to shift over to talking.
can I
Yeah.
just ask this, Matterall? We had that whole conversation, and I don't think I'd kind of like to go around the horn and just just ask. Everybody here to kind of answer, right? Back to the casino thing, just real quick, just as an answer so that people out there know. Do you think casinos are good or bad for Eve? And no elaboration, just
And you guys in chat, you guys write that the answer to your opinion as well.
I think they're just fine. I think they're just fine.
Reaver, we'll go counterclockwise.
I think casinos are, well, they've always been part of Eve, so I don't think they're bad or good. I think it's an interesting direction that it's going, and we'll have to see how it plays out once this war's over, if they carry on to another one or whatever.
Drayden?
I'm fine with them. I have gone on several of these gambling sites and gambled myself. I do enjoy a little bit of gambling here and there, so I'm okay with them. The only negative thing I've ever seen come from the gambling sites is this recent one where we lost our home. But I'm still okay with it.
Ash?
They bring value to ISK, therefore they are good.
I'll answer too, if you don't mind. I think they're terrible and they should be gone. Well, the only thing they do that it's good is the community they build among the bankers who all really like each other. And well, actually, they all hang out with each other. And very nice people. I really like the people at I Want ISK. Great people. And it's a really nice atmosphere that they built. But it's a casino, and to me that is kind of a dirty place. The concept of sitting there just leaking money out is awful. And I think that the fact that it sits on Eve is a real blemish on Eve itself.
Well, again,
Hey, not your turn.
Yes or
Oh,
no?
sorry.
Mesner.
Yeah, no, I think Lenny is a fantastic person. I think they're all great guys, but yeah, right now I'm kind of the opinion that casinos are probably a negative influence on the ecosystem of EVE Online.
Mark and then Dirk.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're very bad. It's just going to create an arms race in the metagame, and you can't pull back from that. It's basically Pandora's box.
Well, I opened it up by saying I think they're fine, but because as an actual thing, I think that they are fine. But what players do with them is a different thing. So you can
That's
get
a
into
great
the,
point.
so you can get into the whole thing of, well, casinos themselves aren't bad. It's what the players do with them. Titans aren't bad. It's what the players do with them. Blobs of ships aren't bad. It's what the players do with them.
Yeah, I think if like CCP set up an ISK sync casino, that's fine. Why would you not want a giant ISK sync in the game?
I think as long as it's RP'd in the game, yeah. That's
Yeah.
an interesting point. Very interesting
I don't
point.
know why they don't do like EVE Vegas.
Yeah.
Like, do the EVE Vegas experience in the game for the people that can't go.
Right, because the stations were supposed to be that walking in stations, which is, talking in stations is a take on that. Walking in stations was going to be like gambling sites and strippers and things like that. And for some reason, that would be okay with me. But actually, let's pivot. We're going to talk about the last subject for the night, and that is the offshoring. Speaking of tax evasion, and it's a perfect thing to go with gambling. So, Reaver, can you get us up to speed on what's going on there?
Are we taking a break first, or are we going?
We're going to skip intermission. This is too fun.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, basically, since the large citadels came out in HiSec last week, there's been a thing called offshoring, which traders are doing, which is where you sit one jump out of Jita and you place a ranged buy to cover Jita, and you pay, instead of the new CCP taxes at 3% or and 1% on the sales tax, you pay whatever fee the Citadel owner charges you. So I sit in, for example, New Caldari, and I pay 0.3% broker fee to buy items in Jita, and then I pay the normal Jita fee on the other side. So I avoid half the tax.
Now, this isn't emergent. This was one of the functions of Citadels. It just happens to be working, right?
I don't know whether it counts as emergent or whether it counts as an intended thing that CCP planned on that.
Well, they increased the taxes for the sake of making Citadels more attractive. Well, I mean, they claim that they already were planning on doing that, but I mean, it definitely does that, and they knew that it would do that.
I want to point out that this is
There
a
are carrots that are to induce these things, right? To induce people using Citadels.
Yeah,
I don't think that's surprising at all, right?
I think people were going to use Citadels, but I think what a lot of people assume is that you're going to do the entire trade through a Citadel. So you're going to buy your ship in the Citadel, and then you're going to sell it in the Citadel. What you do here is you sit outside of Jita in the Citadel, and you buy in Jita, and then you sell in Jita. So at no point are any of your assets at risk of getting locked up when the Citadel blows up for 5 days, and it's not at risk for the 6 days between the second and the third timer on the Citadel. You're just...
Sorry, let me see if I understand what exactly you're saying. So you never go to Jita, however, all of your trading is happening in Jita. So because you're inside of a Citadel, you are actually putting in a trade in Jita at Citadel prices, basically. So
Citadel taxes.
Yeah, at Citadel taxes. So
Or broker fees.
So it's never moving to the Citadel or anything like that. You're just simply proxying yourself. You're basically sheathing yourself in the Citadel in order to protect yourself against the taxes.
Pretty much, yeah. You pay taxes on the sell side that are the normal station taxes, but you don't pay them on the buy side at all. And if you're the Citadel owner, you of course can have 0% broker fee. And for new traders, this is really good because new traders, you don't need broker fee, broker relations skill, and you don't need any standing with the corporation or the faction in order to get the Citadel fee. That's entirely set by the owner.
wow. So you don't need to spend time skilling up those skills anymore.
No, it's a 4-day at the moment. You need to use visibility to place an order with a range from the Citadel. But basically, yeah, I sit in New Caldari and I say I will buy a Plex, and I set a 1-jump buy order. And then the Plex gets sold to me in Jita, and then I open my assets in Jita and I right click and I list it on the market for sale. Without actually anything ever coming to me.
All right, at this point, I want to point out that this is all written up by Rivra for TMC, and you can find it. It's called Offshore. You can see it on the screen, actually. Offshore, but for our podcast listeners. Offshore, Tax Avoidance Comes to New Eden. That's an article on TMC written by Rivra.
So do we have any knowledge
I'm
about
such
whether
an
or not...
idiot. I just connected Rivra to that article. I'm so sorry. Yes, that was a great article.
Well, it's a good thing you didn't criticize it.
No, I thought it was a great article.
Yeah.
I'm just sitting here for the last 3 hours or however long we've been doing this, and I've been trying to put together where I've heard that name before.
Yeah, it's a great writer.
So do we have any knowledge about whether or not CCP is going to do something about like
Did they intend
we know
this?
that there's going to be Citadel changes. So do you think that they, or would you recommend that CCP change it so that the taxes that you pay are at the location that I guess you couldn't really do that though, because you just said anyone anywhere within 1 jump, anyone anywhere that happens to be 1 jump, which basically guarantees it will be Jita.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the risk that someone at another station will sell it to you. But the way that broker fees work in game is that when you set up the order, you pay the broker fee on the order that you've set up. So in order to make this that you can't skip the taxes like this, it would have to be calculated for every possible location that they want to, that you could possibly get it sold to you at. And this would be a nightmare because there's 10 stations or something within range of me. How do you calculate what I'm going to get at what station? And the other way to do it could be if you paid the broker fee when an item got delivered to you. But that would again be a completely different change to how the market mechanics currently work.
I mean, I think that this may have been an unintended consequence. Whereas with the changing of the tax, the tax system itself, when they bumped that, I think that was to be an inducement for people to go and use Citadels. But now that they know about it, it will be interesting to see if they did know about this or did consider this ahead of time, and if it is a feature and not just an unintended consequence.
Well, I think as well, the other thing is that's interesting about it is how the Citadels are working. There's 4 Fortizars in the Forge at the moment. There's 3 1 jump out of Jeddah, and then there's 1 3 jump out of Jeddah. And what's happening is that these Fortizar owners are currently competing to get traders to come to their Citadels. And so you're seeing things like Happy Hour, where a couple of the Fortizars give you 50% discount on their broker fee for 2 hours a day. And then there's another one where they do frequent flyer miles. So the more you trade, the lower your broker fee goes. So it starts at 1 and it can work down to 0.2. So it's interesting seeing how these are actually playing out with the players.
That is fascinating. And that, to me, is why it rivals gambling sites, because they have promotions too. But it's so interesting to see them applied inside the game. And for me, it seems a little more legitimate. So you don't think that, I think my personal opinion is CCP will probably let this play out a bit. This probably won't be a nerf tomorrow. Some people think this might get fixed like next patch. What do you think?
I don't think so. As I said, I think it would, if you say that you can only do certain range from a Citadel, then yeah, that's going to be problematic. People aren't going to be sure why you can do that. And if you have to change the broker mechanics, then you're going to affect everyone who does region-wide buy orders in EVE. And yeah, that's quite a few people.
Let me ask you a question then. So a similar thing. Let's say I'm 1 jump from Jeddah and I'm in a station, and I can't remember what kind of things are 1 jump station. I know that there's like an SOE 1 jump from Jeddah, but it's not within the same region, but let's just pretend it is. So let's say I've got really good SOE standings and I sit in an SOE station and I do the exact same thing.
Of course, SOE.
Do I gain that same? Well, I actually only know that because I have to hop over there for my discovery stuff. So this is actually something that has existed in the game forever. It's just the Citadel brings a highlight to it.
Well, for example, if there's a Caldari station in St. Glazon, which is a Gallente region, and I have really crap Gallente standing, but I have really good Caldari standing, I can sit in there and place a region buy order, and I'll get my Caldari standing as the broker fee. So yeah, it's a mechanic that's always existed in EVE, but it's just that with the Citadel increase in the broker fees, it makes more of a difference now. I mean, for me, for example, I have really bad Jeddah standings because I'm bad at EVE. So I pay 2.5% in Jeddah. So on a Plex, I would normally pay 21 million buy. Sitting in a Citadel, I pay 4 million buy. So it's a significant change in the broker fee for me.
Right, but in a way, this is just an extension of what already existed, though, right? Because it's not like everybody was paying the same broker fee before, and now some other people are able to undercut it, right? If you had your skills trained right and you had standings right, you can get yourself down to a minimum amount before.
And
so
actually,
this is just an extension.
This was a service. Well, that was a service before too, because standing services existed, right? So I'm gonna, I'll help you get your standings up for a fee. It's kind of the same thing, right? Yeah. Like you as a service, I will help you lower your taxes.
Yeah, and of course, standings still count for the sell side because you're still selling in Jeddah. I'm still paying 21 million per Plex on the sell side in Jeddah. It's just on the buy side I'm saving it. But it's and the other thing you can do as well is.
By the way, that buy side means you buy through a buy order because there was never a tax if you just buy something.
Yeah,
Right.
if you direct buy or sell, you pay no broker fees. This is for orders with a 3-month duration or whatever duration you want to put up for it. But the other thing
Yeah, this
you
is
can-
just about broker fees.
yeah, it's just about broker fees. Sales taxes aren't affected at all by the Citadels. But one of the interesting things you can do as well is if you can't dock and you can't use the market in a Citadel, then people can't see the orders outside. So you can't set up a private Citadel and only allow, say, yourself. Like if Dirk wants to set up Dirk's big trade hub just outside Jeddah and only allow himself to trade in it, he can't do that because no one else will be able to see any orders that hit Jeddah. But what you can do is you can set your own fee to 0 and then set the public fee to 70%, because then no one will come in and use it anyway. But you will still be able to do that. And the cost for a private Citadel like that would be, if you only put a market module on it, it would be around 20 billion ISK. And because you save on the broker fees, if you save 2.5 billion per day on a broker fee, then you will pay for that Citadel in about 8 days. And because of the vulnerability timers, you can set most of the vulnerability timers to be at least 6-7 days from when you drop the Citadel, if you do it right. So then you have another 24 hours before your markets go offline. So if you can make back the 20 million in saved broker fees in 8 days, then you can afford to just cycle through these Citadels. And the broker, to save 2.5 billion per day, you would need to put through 125 billion, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. We're not talking 125 billion profit. We're talking about 125 billion turnover in a day. So say you flip 100 plexes, buying them one at a time, or it's not as bad as it seems.
This is why more Citadels need to die on a more regular basis out
Yeah,
there.
remember I said don't kill the Citadels, kill them all.
Rashida, are you listening?
What
Every
happens
last
when you
one
just
of them
start
needs to
war
die.
decking? What happens when you just start war decking all the people building Citadels in and around Jeddah, and you blow them up, and you just basically hold that whole area hostage?
Yeah.
Well, if you blow them up, then it's well, with offshoring it's fine because I have no assets in the Citadel, so I just cancel my buy orders and go back to Jeddah.
So it just moves it to like another location.
No, it never goes to the Citadel. It never left Jeddah. She just makes
Really?
the order in
Yeah,
the Citadel.
you're making buy orders in the
But-
Citadel, but the
but-
buy order range is reaching to Jeddah. So when people sell stuff to the buy orders in Jeddah, you're actually buying those. So your
Yeah.
assets are still in Jeddah.
Sorry, but aren't they canceled when it goes into reinforce? Aren't all orders canceled?
No, the second
CCP, that's
reinforce,
messed up, yo.
the second reinforce it goes.
So
market
gangster,
services go
Mark.
offline. So for 6 days between the second and third reinforce, there is no market. That's why you only have 1 day once it starts getting attacked.
Wow.
Before it goes offline, and the orders are automatically cancelled if it gets exploded, and then you have to wait 5 days for them to be transferred to asset safety if you have anything there. But that's the point with this offshoring. Like say Porkbutt decides to come and attack someone's Citadel with Karma Fleet. There's 4 in the forge. They all have different vulnerability windows. So me as a trader, I can just hop to the next Citadel over.
Yeah,
And
man,
set
you
up
don't need
my
that
orders.
many. Like, you just get like a couple of catalysts, like 50 catalysts, go over there and just pop, pop, pop.
Yep. I will say that all the ones in HiSec at the moment, and I'm probably about to make this change, they haven't been attacked because they've got most of the HiSec Merc groups on hire with them. So
Uh-oh.
It's also worth
Yeah.
noting that these are Fortizars, right? Like
Yeah, they
Astra
are.
houses are kind of pushovers, but Fortizars are fairly defensible.
Yep.
yeah, they are, and they've been up for just over a week now. 3 of them have, and then the 4th just went up yesterday. So yeah, there's and with the vulnerability timers, they'll be at different times during the week, so you won't be able to kill them all on the same day. And so that like you can just jump around between them as a trader.
Well, so
Okay, so,
Whack-a-mole.
so
Go
we
ahead.
know about this. What's the downside? Should people be out there be concerned, or is this just another one of those things where you know what, the people who know how to play Eve know about this, take advantage of it, and that gives them an advantage?
Well, one of the reasons I did the article for TMC and that I'm doing this show about it is that I want basically everyone to trade like this, especially new traders. They can't usually compete against the 10-10 standing guys. But with this, I mean, I can undercut a guy who's got 10-10 standing and I have 0 standing in Jeddah. So it's a 4-day train from the beginning. From a new character with 0 implants, 0 remaps, it's a 4-day train to be able to do this from a Citadel. So I just want as many traders as possible to do this in as many different locations.
Now, real quick with the standings, I am not a trader. I don't know a lot of stuff with the standings, but is the when you say standings in JITA, is that specific towards the corporation, like towards the Caldari Navy that owns that trading?
It's
or is it just the Caldari
Navy
Empire?
and faction. You need to have 10-10 to both to get the 2% broker fee.
Well, can't you? Isn't there like those one tags you can buy that will increase your standing? Couldn't you
No,
buy a bunch? Of
that's
those?
only if you're
That's
negative.
security. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
security
That's
standings.
security
That's
okay, never
not.
mind.
That's not standings with the corporation.
Yeah, that's a lot.
only-
That's a lot of missions, right?
Yeah, the way that you generally get your standings up is that you have a mission or slave run it, which actually I don't even know if that's.
I think you can pay people to missions for you.
You can, yeah, you can
That is
hire
correct.
people to run missions, yeah.
Okay,
So-
so you got to teach me how to do that.
This brings me to somebody explain to Ash why he's wrong, because this actually brings up a good point, which is that I tried to do this the other day and I ran a couple of missions, and never mind, it looks like it updated and it did give me my standings. Like I ran 2 missions and there was no standings changed on my alt, but now that I go back to it, I now see the standings, so it might not have updated. Never mind.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that for new traders, and I know Porkbutt is not very happy about us high sec traders doing this sort of thing, but it's I think for new traders trying to get into EVE, they can compete on the broker fees for once. It's irrelevant whether you've got perfect standing, whether you've got broker relations 5. You just need visibility 2 and day trading 2, and then you can take on anyone you want in JITA.
I also really like the fact that it's really is a who you know situation, right? Like,
I know Reaver.
Yeah, I do know that one of the concerns people have had, and I've heard this thrown about a few times, is how do we know that these citadels aren't set up by goons? How do we know that they're not set up by Imperium or PL
We'd
or
never
whoever?
do something.
you
like
don't.
that.
Good luck.
That would be the biggest troll ever.
But
Yeah.
no, that's so stupid though, because it's like, well, how do I know this Galente ice wasn't mined by goons? Like,
Exactly.
Who cares?
How
I
do you
can
know I'm
I
not a
can
goon?
confirm that if you see one of these citadels that is down there and raking in the money, it is owned by Aerith. So if you don't like
Yeah.
Aerith, you shouldn't use those citadels, people.
Aerith is Goon Swarm's finance manager.
But I do think something else that's interesting that's happening is traders are developing favorite stations. So like there is people who prefer the perimeter one, people who prefer the new Caldari one, and they're reaching deals with the owners of it. And so we're seeing we may start seeing that, for example, a lot of mineral traders prefer the perimeter hub, the perimeter citadel, and other ones prefer the new Caldari one for faction modules. It all depends what deals you can make with the owners as well, and that's what people are saying. They're saying, I'm paying them broker fees. Like I'm a low scale trader, and I'm paying 200 million a day in broker fees or so to one of the citadels, and they're making on average 3 billion or so per day. And this is with very low take up so far, with like 11 people in there at max in the citadels, and 4 to 5 people in there at any given time.
That is amazing that they have preferences in citadels. I guess it's closer to where they actually work or something.
Well, it's more that what they're being offered. It's you go to the owner and you say, okay, I do 10 billion a day, 20 billion a day. What can you offer me to come to your citadel?
This is amazing gameplay that I don't know if CCP was aware this was going to happen, but it's amazing.
Are we gonna come back a year from now? Let's see here. Today is May 27th. So May 27th, somewhere around that time, 2017, we can come back and we can cry about the people who own these citadels and how they financed a war against somebody else out there, and it'll be the
Totally
it'll be the
different.
Trade Hub Citadel.
No, totally different because
No.
this is in the
Because
this is inside the game. Sorry, Ash.
I think as well, like what traders aren't going to undock and fight for a citadel, but the question becomes, if say me and 5 or 6 other people are sitting in a citadel and someone attacks it, are we prepared to bankroll the owner in order to defend what we consider our home, or are we just going to up and move to the next citadel that offers us the next best deal?
See, I think that's really cool emergent gameplay to an extent. I think the only issue I have is like you should actually have to dock somewhere that you sell your goods. Like you shouldn't just like be able to go to an NPC station in JITA, list your goods in whatever citadel is giving you the best rates. Like you should actually have to go there and dock there, because then you have like the physical element of having to move it there and get caught and run up on the undock with like 50 bill worth of injectors. I mean,
Well, that's I mean, region trading's always been a thing. I can modify and list orders at region range, so I can reach however many jumps is in region and open my assets and list something on the market.
sure.
So this is not a new thing. This has always been there. It's just the Citadels thing is, yeah, it's taking it to the extreme with avoiding the taxes, because there's never been that big difference between the taxes before. And to answer the Alcoholic in chat, there are Citadels. Heck is unfortunately not so much for Trade Hub anymore.
Oh.
Amar has 3 Fortizars, I think, and though Dixie's got 2 one jump out of it in Botane. Amar has them in Ashab, Agessi, and somewhere else that I can't remember. But they are springing up. It's just getting people to move to them.
It's a moment of silence for Heck. Yeah.
Jita actually has
In the ghetto.
Jita has 3 Fortizars within one jump, according to the structure
it
browser
does.
right now.
It does. Yeah.
I think-
And it's got a 4th 3 jumps out, and I'm actually sitting 3 jumps out on one character because I like the quieter chat. There's like 5 people in local instead of all the shit you get in Jita chat and the perimeter and the surrounding areas.
Oh my god, you get to avoid chat. That's like a reason in and of itself.
Oh
Yeah.
man, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a
Tax
pretty good
avoidance
why-
and no jitter chat.
Bi-
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's why I'm sitting there.
Do it in Ren's.
Community.
You know, I think of Ren's as Acapulco. It was kind of hot in the 70s. Like, it just feels sad.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that people are not sure about is that they don't like funding other players. But really, when you buy my stuff off the market, you're funding me. You know, when you sell to my buy orders, you're funding me anyway. If you're worried about who you're funding, then you probably should never interact with another player and just trash all your stuff after you get it.
Yeah, that's
and
a
just do
non-issue.
missions.
Do we know who's next after us before we wrap up here?
I saw you
think
put that
Drunk
in the
Canadian.
I think he is, but he didn't answer you, so we don't know what he's playing.
Yeah.
If he is
Well, I'll tell you what. We're going to go up to the hour, and then we'll say goodbyes. And you think that's okay to go like 5 minutes over since we started late?
Well, it's not his fault that we started late.
Yeah,
It was
you
your
know,
fault.
should probably end it.
Oh, I'm not punishing him. I'm just saying if he hasn't answered, like, how can I throw it to him if he's not ready?
Definitely on the schedule on for after us. So.
He is okay.
He
All
was
right.
in chat a while ago.
Oh, he is.
Ah,
He-
okay, there he
he's
is.
running back
All right.
now, so.
I just wasted another minute. Sorry, River. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to answer Arik in chat. He's asked if it costs me more to move 3 jumps instead of 1. No, it doesn't. It just opens up the number of stations you can get sold to in. But the Forge has really very few stations outside of Jita. I mean, I've been trading there for a week now, and I've had 6 items total sold to me that weren't in Jita. I had a Plex sold to me in Perimeter, so I just listed it back on the market and someone picked it up. And I had a Paladin and some other Tech 2 ships sold to me in the Jita 5 Business Tribunal place. So I just flew over there, got my DST, and moved it back into Jita 4.4. But I can just list it again. The other hubs, you do get more of a problem, because if you do a 3-jump thing in Dixie, people will sell to you from everywhere. So the Forge is kind of special. Ashab in Amar also works the same way.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap up, can I ask you a question about the Plex wall that happened when the taxes changed? Do you know what? Can you give us a quick update on that?
Yeah, the Plex wall was actually pulled down today. ProBags cancelled that. He got through about 48% of the Plex wall, but with the broker fees, he's been calculating different ways. Now he can sit in a Citadel and have 0.2 broker fees, which is what he had before. So he can just do the same thing again from a Citadel now instead of doing it in Jita. But he's actually looking into other markets that he's going to start playing around with now. So you'll probably hear more from him soon.
The Plex wall was an article that was written in TMC, and it talks about a guy that put up a gigantic wall of Plex that people would have to buy through, and I think it was at 950 and then later at 850 million. And that allowed a break. So when the Plex was free falling, it would hit his wall, and they would have to buy through all of his Plex, which were many, many, many Plex. And by doing that, he was making a fortune. Do we know how much money he ended up making?
Last I spoke to him, and I haven't got the final numbers, it was around 250 billion he'd made since the patch off of a 70 billion investment. So that's not bad. And he was away on vacation for a week, and he was only playing a couple of hours a day.
So all that money was made just by calculating the difference in tax when he. It gets complicated. There's an article on TMC about it, so go ahead and read that for more information. All right, let's go into our last section, which is giving everybody a chance to get on the podium and say what they want about anything, good or bad. And let's start with Dirk. You never like to start, so you want to go last?
I don't know. I don't have anything to say, so you can just move on to something else.
We'll come back to you then. Yeah, maybe we don't have anything to say. I don't know. Let's go with Rivra.
Yeah, come to a Citadel and start avoiding the CCP taxes.
Stick it to the man.
Isle of Man.
Yeah. Drayden, do you have anything you want to single out?
Yeah. E-Vegas is in 22 weeks from now, starting today.
It's always a crowd pleaser. But you know what? The truth is things are selling out, so you may want to look into it quickly. Yeah. Ash?
Yeah, I just want to highlight Timbre and the Caldari Prime Pony Club. For those of you who do not know, Timbre has worked on a project that is now going to be known as Creator Studio. He made the website which allows you to basically render any spaceship in Eve, in any nebula, with any skin, or do all kinds of crazy stuff. A lot of the really clever visual work that you see from a lot of content creators outside of Eve come directly from his tools. And he is working to create the Creator Studio, and there is a fundraiser up to help him go through that process. So at the very least, you should head on over to the Caldari Prime Pony Club and check out the stuff that he's got there. Check out his Creator Studio link, which I think is still on like the first page of our Eve today, and it's not too difficult to find. The work is visually stunning, and I think it's a really good thing. So even if it's just to let other people know about it, or even if it's just finding it yourself, so that way you can make some cool stuff for your own corp. Cool content to look at for Eve. Is what's really it's all about, right? So I just wanted to highlight that and kind of showcase it as something that I really love about Eve and his work in particular.
All right, Marconius, and we'll give Stephen the last word, or second to last.
Not
word.
a sponsor.
Marconius, you have anything? Yeah. Good morning.
Hi guys.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And
Great. Everybody love
The thing about
everybody.
these Eve nerds is I get older, they always stay the same age.
Yeah.
That's deep. Stephen, thanks.
Yeah, I mean,
How am I
like,
supposed to follow that?
I don't know, like, you can try.
Okay, I got some. So, as an investigative journalist, don't you think it's just a little bit suspicious that weeks after Iceland was embroiled in a tax evasion controversy, now that EVE Online is embroiled in the same type of controversy,
You would say that. wouldn't
connect
you?
the dots, people. Stop being
It's
sheep.
all Trump.
Yeah. Wake up. CCP is run by the president of Iceland.
Derek, you have anything you want to point out or anything?
No, I mean,
Talk about? You had a great show on.
the Open Com show, whatever. Yeah. I mean,
Open Comps was really funny. If you guys didn't see it, go back to yesterday on the Matani.com past videos and look up Open Comps. The last show was really funny. It was back like the old days. It was just, it had really good jokes all the way through. And Dirk, your timing was amazing.
it's the alcohol, man. Instant good timing.
There's like a little bit of a balance
it's
there.
not.
Yeah, totally. Until you go off the cliff.
What is it? Balmer's Peak?
All right, I'll wrap up the show. Thanks, everybody, for coming and joining us, especially Stephen. Thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
Can you send my boobs and FanFest, Steve?
I will be signing boobs at EVE Vegas, so come
Well,
see me.
there'll be plenty there.
Yeah.
All right, guys. That does it for us. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
But
Aderon is recruiting.